Okay, demo number 2. Let's start it out. So as before, you can see I've got my drawing in front of me. I have all of my utensils out. I also have a piece of blank paper. Now, this is one of those do as I say, not as I do moments. If you're worried about smudging with your hand, what you're gonna wanna do is keep this piece of paper underneath your drawing hand, righty or lefty, right? Okay? Very useful, prevents you from smudging as you go. So we can see I've got my drawing nicely mapped out. I've got my shadows started. I have my setup right next to me again. It's moved a little bit, but that's part of life. We've dealt with that in class and we'll deal with it today too. What I want to do is today I want to start focusing on finding my smaller shapes, some value put into my fabric, and I want to start looking at how I'm doing mark making, right? Because when I'm shading with graphite, what I'm going to do is turn this so you can see right here, right? The different types of shading I can do. If you want a smooth shading, I recommend working in very tiny circles. I'm applying more pressure where I want it to be darker. And then I'm still working in tiny circles, but I'm applying lighter pressure where I want it to be lighter, okay? Now you can see that's about as dark as I can go with this HB pencil. It doesn't get any darker than that, okay? That's why I have my color pencil too, so that if I work in tiny circles over my 6B pencil, which you can see they do not want to blend very well, okay? That's because there's probably more wax in my color pencil than in this, but you can see how that changes the gradient. Now, some of us are using mark making, right? We can do a quick crosshatch, right? Some of us are using really dynamic lines where we're going forward and then we're shading out. We can do textural scribbles. You can see how it changes depending on the lead that I'm using, right? Some hatching marks. My point is that, like, if you noticed on Blackboard, we're all making very different types of marks, okay? And there's not a wrong way to do this as long as you're pushing your full range of value. That's why I've got a couple of different pencils out, okay? I'd like it if you could do that. If you can't, I understand, but then you might have to explore more mark making, all right? I'm gonna find that my color pencil is how I'm gonna get my darkest darks, because these leads aren't just gonna cut it, all right? But so, that's also why I like having this margin here. It lets me push finding my full range of value, okay? If you ever get stuck, do a color study. Find your gradient, okay? So, here's my drawing out. I'm gonna use my mechanical pencil today, okay? And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start correcting some of my shapes that have changed since I've drawn last, okay? This one, no longer here. Now it's a lot of vertical and directional lines. So I'm gonna erase some of these. And I'm gonna make that correction, okay? And I'm letting it go right off the edge of the page. And areas where I can start shading, I'm going to. And I'm not just gonna shade it in one tone now, okay? I'm gonna try and get a little bit of a gradient. All right. What I'm seeing is that in my folds, it starts darker here, and it lightens on its way up the edge. You can see I'm most comfortable making the swish, 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 you know, mark gesture. That's how I like shading. Find your way of doing it, okay? There's no wrong way to shade. You just have to find the shapes, okay? Because what I'm doing is now I'm trying to find a lot of these smaller shapes, okay? This is gonna help me when we talk about finding shape, right? And dynamic line, right? You see how my line quality is changing? What this is doing is building form, right? So I'm working on finding all my small folds, right? I'm gonna use a lot of cross hatching. You can see I'm moving pretty quickly, okay? I notice that a lot. It makes it a little easier if I kind of work quickly. I see a lot of shapes up here where my folds kind of come in and it goes off of the page, right? It's usually darker at its base, and I'm working on my gradient, right? You can see I'm not super worried about my edges, right? I'm not designating a shape and making sure I sit and color it in its entirety. I'm doing a loose sketch of the shape, and then I'm using my tool to create a new shape based on that, where I'm going outside of my lines a little bit, okay? That's gonna prevent an outlining sensation, all right? It's also important that I'm using this tool, right, to go off the edges of the page, because what I'm doing now is I'm breaking up a lot of this space. Now I'm drawing darker still, okay? Remember that. I'm drawing a lot darker than I think you will need to start, okay? But that's just so you can see what I'm doing. I'm still using my eraser to kind of correct some of my lines that have changed, all right? I'm working right up to the edge of the tape. Now you see what I'm doing here by kind of cross-hatching in this shadow, right? Right here in particular. Do you see how this has gone from an outline to an edge? We've talked a lot about that in class, right? Where you shade around a shape, all right? So that's working to my advantage here. See, you can see, I don't know if you can see or not, but I'm starting to get graphite on my hand, which look like very old lady hands because I wash them a lot. All right, that's why I use this paper, because as I'm working, I'm gonna smudge with my hand. Not as much as you would with charcoal, but definitely a good bit, okay? All right. So now this is some of my shadow. And you see my markers get a lot, my marks are getting a lot sketchier, a lot looser in the background, all right? I'm just kind of using it to designate that this is a negative space shape. You can see up here, I started with very tiny fine lines. Here, I'm making big gestural marks, okay? At this point, I'm also gonna keep my color pencil with me, right? Because this area in here is really dark. This is one of my darkest darks, and I know that. So I can start committing to it, okay? Now it's hard, like I said, to go over the lead with the color pencil. So instead of making bigger marks, right, which I'm doing here, I'm doing a lot of cross hatching. That's just my method of working, okay? I'm very scribbly. You're allowed to switch it up. I'm gonna have to press really hard to start getting some of my dark tones in here. All right. But you see how quickly I'm moving? Still just very, very fast work. All right, I'm gonna start on the knot itself, and I'm gonna start finding some of my smaller shapes in here where it's got a little bit of shading. Okay. Now I'm looking a lot at my drawing. I like to keep my still life next to me so I can see both of them. If something's feeling wrong, pick it up and find a mirror, turn it upside down, take a picture of it, look at it in a different angle. It's okay, I know we're working from home, but you can really change your approach or practice some of the same techniques, okay? Now, as I'm doing this, I'm also giving it a little bit more detail as I find these small shapes, okay? See what I mean? How I'm kind of correcting this shape and making it more complex and more dynamic. What I'm starting to do is also comparing my dark values, right? This is negative space behind my knot. This is a shadow. This is the fabric that's in the foreground, right? So I know that this space here is the darkest, right? This is a step darker. This is a step lighter, right? Comparing and contrasting my dark tones. I'm going to use a lot of dynamic lines here to try to show the movement of the fabric where it's bunching. All right, and you see how this is starting to render? You know what I'm going to do is kind of show you the difference. Now I want you to work the whole thing up, right? So I am starting here, but I'm just kind of finding all of my big shapes. I'm not doing any of my frosting details, right? I'm not finishing it. What I'm doing is I'm establishing different values and different shades. I'm starting to use multiple tools. If you have multiple tools, use multiple tools. If you don't, explore all your options with the tools you have, like I did at the start, by making a lot of marks, okay? You see how it makes a big difference, okay? Now, this is what we're getting to, all right? By the end of class on Wednesday, everything needs to look like this. This is the goal. This is laying in smaller shapes and it's laying in value, all right? This is our class on Monday, the first class mapping, and this is so you see the difference. This does need to extend to the background as well, okay? If you haven't resolved your background, now is the time to start doing that. All right, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna kind of like draw along with you on Wednesday for this part and keep our demo the same. That way I can post my progress with you as well. All right. Thank you everyone for tuning in.